Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. My name is Ariana. I am the co-director of the Consent Academy, an international Seattle-based nonprofit that aims to teach about consent as part of everyday life. And my tummy is full of delicious Indian food. I was just chomping on some paneer naan, and it's really good. Uh, this is one of the problems with Indian food is every time I have it, I definitely overeat to the point where I'm like, I feel a little uncomfortable uh, with how much food is in my stomach. Like it's hard to sit normally because I'm just like, oh, that's so full. Anyway, uh, hello, Krellin. Welcome. For everybody else in the audience or who's watching on the videos later, wherever you are, whatever you're up to, I hope that you're having a great day. Um, and thank you for joining me. I'm excited to be here today. So, what are we going to talk about? Sorry, I got started a couple of minutes late. I was in another meeting, or I was in a meeting, and I had to, it wasn't even finished yet. And I was just like, hey, oh, wait a second. And it took a second for it to be possible for me to say, hey, I need to go. Um, anyway, what are we going to talk about today? Today, I found originally I wanted to do a watch party today, but I think that a watch party is going to make more sense to do differently, not on Twitch, but maybe through Discord instead, because I'm not super jazzed about the way that Twitch does it. It's not as interactive as I thought it would be. So keep an eye out on the Discord for a discussion of when we're going to do a watch party. Next, moving on, the other things I want to talk about today are things like regret and consent. And how does, people often think about regret as like a thing that makes them worried about consent. People often think like, oh, we can't teach too much about consent because like people just like regretting something, after the fact or years later or whatever, that's just like taking it too far. And I'm really scared of that. I don't want people to, and or they think it's ridiculous. And a lot of the time it still comes back to fear, like fear that you're going to find out way after the fact that even though you tried your best or you feel like you did everything right, the person that you interacted with feels like you violated their consent. And like, I get why people are afraid of that because nobody wants to find out that they've hurt somebody, like for sure. I mean, there are like a few very small percentage of people in the world who maybe want that, but setting it the outliers aside, for the most part, no one wants to hurt people. And we can get really worried about finding out that we have. And sometimes we also really want to think about consent as like a game of rules and logic and say, like, well, if we followed all the rules, that means everything is good. But that's not life. That's not how consent works. That's not how any of it works, right? Like, people change their minds about things all the time. I might say yes to someone giving me a piece of cake and then get halfway through and then realize, oh, it's got nuts in it and I'm not really feeling nuts. And so I don't want to finish it. And I might say like, oh, I wish you had told me that there had been nuts in it because I wouldn't have said yes to this cake. What if I'm allergic to nuts? Or like, and I'm not even thinking about it because I don't even realize that people put nuts in the cake or like something else. Like one of the things that I think then gets tricky in this discussion is that people start to worry that if they've made a mistake, that automatically means they're a bad person. Because we have this problem with binary bias where you're either good or you're bad. Something is either consensual or it's, assault or it's like a crime. And, things that you either like something or you hate something. And for the most part, daily life is actually a lot more gray than all of that. And I think regret is something that we don't talk about enough when it comes to processing consent. A lot of the time, just to kind of give you a little summary, my feeling about regret it comes to what might cause someone to regret saying yes to something after the fact often comes down to a couple of things. Either they didn't have enough information before they said yes, um, and so they didn't totally understand what it was they were consenting to. They didn't have enough time to actually process the thing that they were being asked to be part of. And so they, again, didn't really have time to understand what it was Hieraden, what it was they were consenting to. Or they didn't know what they didn't know, especially when it comes to things like potential impact, where it didn't even occur to them to ask if X kind of impact or risk is possible. And so the impact is also something that can make them feel regret. And in a lot of these cases, it's not to say that like the person who was an other person or people involved in this situation are like evil or malicious or bad. It's that there are probably things that could be improved about the consent practices. There are probably things that could work to reduce the risk of this kind of thing going wrong again, and to potentially reduce the risk of it happening at all if we are good about consent. Because to me, a lot of the time, regret after the fact comes from either the consent practices beforehand weren't that good, there wasn't enough information, there wasn't enough time, the person had really reduced capacity, they might have been really drunk or really tired or in a lot of pain, or after the fact, the problem is that there is impact that they didn't expect. There are things that it can be like, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you're going to have sex with somebody. You both are really attracted to each other. You both really like totally are into it. And both people are agreeing. And then instead of during sex, the person being like, yes, oh yes, they just say yep over and over again. So like they're banging you and they're just going, yep, yep. And like that's weird. And you might think, okay, hold up. This does not feel right to me. And had I known that you were going to yep during sex, I wouldn't have wanted to have sex with you. Or I would have wanted to like negotiate about this. So this is something with consent didn't go right here. Now, are we going to say that the person saying yep is like a criminal? No. We're going to say probably this something, needs to be navigated. There are going to be a lot of things in life as well when it comes to consent where neither party involved, nor if they're more than two people, none of the people involved are going to be aware that something could be a thing for somebody else. So even if they spent a ton of time planning things out, asking questions, negotiating, if I've always said yep during sex, yeah, you might, exactly, Ron, you might want to negotiate a gag. If I've always said yep during sex and no one has ever said to me, yep is weird, why are you saying that? And, it might not even occur to me to think to ask someone about this. Now, if I made someone feel uncomfortable with something I did during sex, we should talk about it. We should process it. I would want to apologize genuinely for, the impact that my actions had and sort of own it without needing to like equivocate, without needing to be like, oh, well, I didn't know, I didn't mean to. That's obvious, right? That's why you're apologizing, because it's a mistake, it's an accident. And then, negotiate how you want to move forward. Now, this is not always perfect examples because there are definitely going to be straw men of this statement that people make and like get mad about the straw man. Like it literally happens to Consent Academy on social media like every day. Like we just made a post on some social media about our most recent class called Beyond the Ban: Options for Accountability. We said in our post advertising it like, banning isn't your only option for accountability. There are other things you can do. And also, what about support for the person who was harmed? What about, reforming things in the community? And a bunch of people were like, are you saying that murderers should not be kicked out of communities? And I was just like, where did our point about maybe you should also think about supporting the people who are harmed give you the impression that we're like pro-murderer? Where did that come from? So anyway, the point is that like I always try to work with the fact that sometimes people might create strawmen or misinterpret willfully or otherwise misinterpret things. But there are going to be things where it's like both people can feel like their consent is being violated and affirmed simultaneously. It's very nuanced and it's very complicated. So I want to talk about this a bit more. I think regret, yeah, we should talk about like where does that come in with consent? And also relationships. And also a big thing in relationships that sometimes gets kind of mixed up with all these other things is if one or both people, or if you're in a polyamorous or consensual non-monogamy relationship, that all of the partners, if people start to change in ways that nobody predicted, and people can sometimes then feel like you growing and developing as a person is somehow in violation of like me and our relationship. And there are definitely ways in which those things can be gone about non-consensually, either direction. But it's sometimes important to pull apart, like if I'm feeling like I'm not totally consenting to this situation. Oh, thank you for the 7th month deceptive mirror. Thank you. That's so lovely. Um, that try to figure out like where is the origin of this feeling, because it's still communicating something, but it might need to be that we need to update our consent framework with each other, right? Like if, Charlie and I, the beginning of our relationship, swing dance was a huge part of how we interacted with each other. It was a huge part of our relationship, a huge part of our romance, and it's something we really enjoyed together. And I got really burnt out on it. Mostly not because I didn't like the dancing itself, but more the sort of like social aspects around it. And I got to the point where just like thinking about dancing made me stressed out. Now, this is one of those things where it's very normal, it's very daily life kind of ways things change. I will probably eventually want to come back to swing dancing. I am enjoying not thinking about it for a while. And it's good there. But Charlie misses it a lot. And so we would want to, or we do talk about how to kind of navigate this. How are we going to make sure that our now new changed needs are both being met in a way that still feels good to the relationship that we have? And do we need to create a new framework with each other? Do we need to update our relationship agreements? Sometimes these things get a lot bigger to the point where probably the update that needs to happen is that the relationship needs to change in some more foundational way. For me and Charlie, like me not being super jazzed about dancing, good joke because it's jazz dance. I'm going to high five myself for my own joke. Is not that kind of thing. But for some people, they can be that sensitive to changes in their partner's, way of doing things. And it's okay. I see Arad, and you said, yeah, people love to argue, and so we'll try to find any issue with it possible. Yeah, I mean, I can enjoy a lot of those conversations sometimes. Hi, Paladin Hulk. Okay, and then Deceptive Mirror, you said that makes sense though. People aren't necessarily static unless they're orange and their name rhymes with rump, and so should be, and so should be consent, right? Yes, I mean like consent, especially as it goes over a long period of time, is likely to be the kind of thing where people need to check back in with each other and reaffirm things with each other and make sure that things are working. The dynamics that I set with somebody at the beginning of a friendship, a working relationship, a romantic relationship, those sorts of things are often going to evolve over time and they need to be tended to. One of the things that comes up in a lot of the Reddit posts that we analyze is how often people will be like, okay, precedents that I didn't realize I was setting at the beginning of my relationship with this person have now become sort of entrenched dynamics, and I don't actually consent to that dynamic. And I'm not actually comfortable with it. It's making me miserable, or it makes me feel unappreciated, or whatever. And that means that if both people or the group of people are invested in the relationship, they should come back and renegotiate that framework with each other. It's obviously easier if you actually did things kind of explicitly, especially if you like write out agreements with each other and check in that the agreements are being followed. You see that kind of thing a lot more in the polyamory world, because polyamory is full of a bunch of nerds. Which brings me to this lovely tweet. I don't know why the person who shared it on Imgur has sort of covered up the original tweeter's name. Maybe it's because they don't want the person to get dogpiled or something. But like, I don't know. I like to give people credit for their ideas. Unless if I were like a huge Twitter account and I was like screenshotting somebody's thing to like talk about it, I would cross out their name for sure, but that's kind of different. Anyway, this person said, I love when you ask someone about a thing they know a lot about and they start with, okay, so, because you know you're about to get a novel's worth of nerd shit and it's going to be so delightful. And so I think that works really well with things like people who do consensual non-monogamy, relationship anarchy, polyamory, any of the above. Often are people who, when they're doing it well, are often really, really invested in understanding consent, boundaries, frameworks with each other, keeping track of if not only are they being respected, but are they serving everybody involved? Are people actually feeling satisfied with that relationship agreement? Or is there something else that needs to be updated? Regular check-ins. Paladin Hulk, I see that you asked, are there other things that you could do similar to dancing? Judo, maybe, fencing? We do a lot of other things. We both really like but you often need a car to get to it, so that's difficult. We go for a lot of walks, not as many as would be nice, but a decent amount. And we play a lot of video games together, and we read books. So we have like plenty of like things that we do and that we share with each other, which is nice. It helps that dancing wasn't like the only thing we shared. If it were, it would be a lot more essential for us to like find something else to replace it or to work to get it so that I was like ready to go back. Okay, continuing. Krellin, you fenced in high school. Nice. What did you fence? And Deceptive Mirror, you said you did historical fencing. Nice. So many Reddit posts depict extremely uneven sexual relationships. It's really disheartening. It is true, and this is also one of those things where why I think it's important to talk about consent. I got distracted by all the messages because I tried fencing for a little while, and I also only did foil, but you know. It's fun. I really liked fencing, and then I was like, but this doesn't really make sense as a martial art, because if I just like step to the side, it doesn't work anymore. And somehow that like killed it for me. It felt very similar to when my mom pointed out that like in every episode of Scooby-Doo, it's always just a person in a mask, and it's never actually like a monster or a ghost or something. And then after that, I was like, well, I can't watch Scooby-Doo anymore. That's boring, because it's always just going to be some dude in a mask. That kind of happened to me with fencing. I like fencing, but I also was like, meh. Okay, digression. Deceptive Mirror. I think that some of these things would be really helped if people felt, one, like less afraid of having these kinds of conversations. I think people get afraid of these conversations because we have a real sort of like I don't know, I'm not trying to say productivity mindset, but a sort of like, if something isn't the best or forever, it means that something is wrong. So like people tend to think of, for example, a successful relationship as one that lasts forever. And I would define a successful relationship as one where the people involved feel the relationship was successful, and that, if it ends in a way that's positive for all parties involved. There are definitely like times where I've had people, for example, who I were friends with, where we were really good friends. The friendship meant a lot to me, and I know it meant a lot to them. And then I got to a point where, time had passed. We'd become really different people. We were at really different life stages. And it didn't really work for us to stay really involved with each other's lives. But that wasn't a failed friendship. It was just a friendship that came to a very natural end. Anyway, so I think because people are afraid of that kind of thing, they're afraid to have hard conversations because they're afraid of what they might learn. Um, Even though, like, I would rather be alone than be with someone who made me miserable, or like be in a relationship that's only held together because neither of us think about it too hard, but that's me. Okay, and then yes, the Krellin, said, yeah, high school fencing was foil only. I think Epee and Saber were determined to be too dangerous. I think, yeah, that makes sense. Paladin Hulk, every time a fencer loses, foiled again. That's good. Rodden, show your mother Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Yeah. Krellin, there were later Scooby-Doo series where they were actual ghosts and monsters. Yeah, I'm sure. I think that people caught on to the whole it's always a dude in a mask thing, and they didn't like it. Rodney said, I stopped due to depression, anxiety, and it was a little ways away from my home. That makes sense. Deceptive Mirror, that's true, but some of them start with this horrid bait and switch, i.e., both parties do oral on each other, but once they move in with each other, one party starts discussing how sexual satisfaction immediately decreased upon cohabitation. Yeah, I mean, that's also true. I think I ran into a lot of problems, not with any of the women that I've dated, but with some of the men, with a lot of the men I've dated. As soon as that, like, we were in a long-term relationship, they wouldn't necessarily like stop being good sexual partners. That would often kind of depend on like how giving they were to begin with. But what they would do instead was do things like stop bathing. No longer groom themselves personally. And like it would be a struggle for me because I would be progressively less physically attracted to them because they would just be like greasy and like they hadn't shaved, and they would just like stop washing their clothes. So like, and I don't think it was because some of them it was because they were depressed. And some of them it was just because they felt like they didn't have to try to woo me anymore. So like I don't know. I don't know. But like, I know that kind of sounds like I'm describing depression, but I want to stress like it was not depression for all of these people. For some of them it was, for others it definitely wasn't. And it was difficult because I used to really beat myself up for it and be like, oh, am I just like so shallow? Or like, am I not capable of sustaining sexual attraction over the long term? What's wrong with me? As though that like isn't always its own challenge for most couples. But setting that aside, uh, yeah, that it just was rough. It was rough. It's rough. Yeah. This is not even living together, right? This is like even people I dated in high school. Because yes, I was sexually active in high school. Okay. Uh, Deceptive Mary, you said, it is like, well, I have them now. Time to stop putting my best foot forward. Yeah, I would say that's often what it is. And I think that for a lot of people, it's not necessarily intentional manipulation. I think that there are some people, especially people who do like pickup artist stuff, where I'm going to try to entrap somebody kind of because I'm going to like pretend to be someone I'm not, to trick them into committing to a relationship with me and then hope that like sunk cost basically keeps them with me. But for other people, I think that we get into our head things like the narrative, like if I'm not doing A, B, and C, I will never get a partner. But A, B, and C are really difficult for me. Maybe I could do one of them, but all three of them, I will be really running myself low and I will like really struggle to do that long term. But like for the sake of finding a partner, I'm down to just like completely, run off of fumes for a few years. And then once they get a partner, like, cool, I can kind of just give up on these things. That's me being a little bit of an armchair psychologist, because I can't actually say that this is why things happen. This is not a particular field of psychology I studied a lot in. Mostly, I tried to stay away from things where I was like, this will remind me too much of my exes because I just didn't want that negativity in my life. um, Okay, Aradin. Well, Scooby-Doo was a children's cartoon, so it fit with the tone. I view it the same as crime procedurals where you know that the person is going to get caught in the end. Yeah. Sounds like, well, I got them, so I don't have to put in the effort anymore, and I can just relax and not try anymore. Yeah. Deceptive Mirror, doing a hygiene really needs to be the absolute bare minimum. Um, and I agree with you, Krellin. Going from seeing someone once or twice a week to seeing them every day can really change things because the things we do to go out are not the things we do every day. And I definitely agree with that. Um, yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so let's look at a couple. Let's continue a bit more. We've only gotten through the first meme, not even gotten to any of the Reddit posts yet. So this is from Rachel Simi, I think is how you say this. The night before a move is basically throwing things in the trash that you thought you'd cherish forever with a kind of casual coldness that you did not know you possessed. So, like, I agree with this sentiment in the sense that, like, I've been there. And I also think that it's also a really good point around consent, right? Like, it's something that I think is very, context can change a lot about how we feel about things. So, there are things that in a certain context, certain things are important to us, and then in other contexts, they're not. There can be things where we're really comfortable with some things in some contexts, and then others they're not. And this is also a situation where intensity and capacity reduction can dramatically change how we feel about things, right? The night before a move, you're often pressed for time. You might be sleep deprived. You're definitely going to be more stressed a lot of the time. You might be like freaking out about logistics and you have this tight deadline, and there's a lot going on there. And those are things that reduce our capacity. And you may end up doing things that are not consensual, or you may end up violating your own consent. And then after the fact, being like, well, I threw it away, so I can't really do anything about it now. It's complicated. Deceptive Mary said, I read a Reddit story I'm very glad I cannot find now, but it involved a woman who was with a guy who did zero oral hygiene care for years. And I was like, must you stay? Yeah, that was, yeah, interesting. I knew someone like that in high school where there was like actually like green on his teeth and they looked fuzzy. And he was just, his perspective was like the more I asked him about it because, I was one of the weirdo kids who didn't understand social norms and would just ask people things based off of what I was seeing when I was confused. Because this was not when I was like a little child. This was like 11th grade. And his perspective was like, he felt like the more stuff built up on his teeth, the more protected they were. And I was kind of like, I don't think that's true. And then I'm pretty sure he lost all of his teeth eventually. Sad story. Paladin Hulk, you were absolutely right. All stuff is trash eventually. And some people are terrified of dentists and are concerned the cure is worse than the disease. Yeah, I also think that that's true. Um, I think it's also one of those things though that's tough because you're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to like not consent to a situation, even if it's for a reason that's like shitty or shallow or whatever. And I do think that we can run the risk of like never having boundaries by being too eternally understanding of everything. I think that's rarer than the like, I'm so insistent that everything needs to be good and pleasurable and exactly the way I want it all the time, or you're a bad person and I don't want you around me. I think there's a lot more people in that sort of camp than there are in like, I'm too understanding and kind of never set boundaries because I always understand why people are doing things. Um, but yeah, I think it's a good, yeah. And you're right, Krellin. Dentists are also expensive. All right, this next one here is at Josh Carlos Josh on Twitter, and this is JRR is Jolkin. Is the username. And then the tweet is, "Babe, is everything okay? You've barely added any new books to your massive pile of unread books." Charlie laughed at this one. I will say, Deceptive Mirror, yes, dentists are expensive if you don't brush and floss at least once a day, but I brush and floss more than once a day. I love flossing my teeth because I'm a little bit of a masochist and I enjoy the pain. Feels really nice. And I can sometimes get like too excited to floss. And I try to take very good care of my teeth, but I do get cavities a lot because you can have things. I get them because I get a lot of acid reflux and it's kind of like wearing down my teeth. But you can also get them if your mouth just gets colonized with particularly acidic bacteria, and that can be incredibly hard to treat. And there's not a lot that a person can do about it. Yeah, like I've had a lot of cavities just because when I sleep, my stomach is just constantly trying to erode my teeth for no reason other than a hobby. Hello, Dr. Melody River. Welcome. Is that a reference to Doctor Who? Melody River? Dr. Melody River? Yes, nice. Good reference. Well, welcome. We are talking about a couple of tweets, and then we're going to look at some Reddit stuff. It is kind of spoilers, but okay. So then, this last tweet is from at Slow Little Guy, and it says, "There's not enough enrichment in my enclosure, and pretty soon I'll need to act out." I just really appreciate this because it feels right. It feels relatable. But I also think that, if we're talking about things like long-term relationships, when you cohabitate with people under any sort of reasoning, what people are going to need their place to look like in order to feel comfortable in it can be really different, and it can also change over time. And I think that as much as possible, it's good to be matched with people who are similar to you if you can, like people who are really messy or who like don't care about cleaning certain types of things, or people who really care about cleaning things. Like try to be like with like a little bit like there, because I think a lot of tension comes from those things being at odds with each other. But the other thing I'll say is that sometimes it can change. Like I have become a lot more concerned with things being kind of tidy than I was years ago. It like kind of just came over me. Like I'm like, my brain has changed because if I have a ton of stuff on my desk, I like cannot think. I need my desk to be clean. It's not that clean right now because we were just eating dinner. But like during the meeting I was having right before this. But yeah, it's tough and it's not that well matched. Things get weird. Aradity said, "Oh, I saw an ad that made me think of me." Oh, nice. It showed a bunch of people in cars getting sick and then had the caption, "Car sick or just sick of cars." It was for the Go Train. I love it. I love it. I like the pun. Yeah. Paladin Hulk, I have no idea if I would be able to live with other people after 30 years alone. That's definitely a good point. I think it can be really difficult. Yeah, I think it can be really difficult. We get used to our habits and our way of doing things. All right. Let's look at let's look at some Reddit scenarios. I got a few of them up, but some of them are really weird and some of them are really intense. Let me find one that I think is good. Okay, let's just start with something that's kind of simple, but I think is a good one for discussion. Because it's also a lot about trust and like how do you start conversations. Here's the link. So this person says, fiance, 26 female, left suspicious tab open on Google. My fiance left a tab open on her work laptop, which I noticed the other day. She was searching her star sign compatibility with another sign, which wasn't mine. I saw she Googled a specific date to find the star sign. I don't know anyone who has a birthday on that date she checked out. P.S. I'm not really into star signs. She also isn't an eccentric person per se. Okay, so essentially here this person is, from what I can tell, probably worrying, is my fiance becoming interested in somebody else? Because it is absolutely true that a lot of the time when people want to look up star sign compatibility, it has to do with romantic relationships. People can be looking it up for things like workplace or like parent-child or siblings or friends. Yes, but the most common usage for that is romantic relationships. Now, the person didn't say that it was like her birthday plus this other person's birthday. It was just two star signs. So, like, I'm a little less worried because when it's the exact dates, that rings a little bit more suspicious to me. It's why there's that tweet that was like a conversation between the son and a mother, and the son like calls the mother and says like, "Hey, what time was I born?" And the mom's just like, "Dump her," because and like I definitely did that to Charlie when we were first. I was like, "What time were you born?" Because I wanted to do it, and I don't even really believe in these things. It was just fun. Um, and yeah, so there's a lot of thoughts that are happening here. Paladin Hulk, I definitely agree. Just ask them. I think that a lot of times people like to post this kind of thing on Reddit because it gives them some time to process. First, because they like write it out, which I think is really useful because then they can really say, here is the situation, here's the impact it's having on me, how I feel about it, and what I'm unsure of. And that's really useful. It's actually a genuinely useful exercise for sort of processing when you're not quite sure how to feel about something. The other thing is, it can be sometimes helpful to hear people or read people, in this case, reflecting back to you the situation as well. And that can help you, figure out what you feel about it, but it also sometimes can help you realize why something might be ridiculous. It's one of the ways that therapy can be kind of helpful when your therapist sort of like reflects back to you your own retelling of like blaming yourself for something or whatever, or like assuming that something is going to really go wrong. Sometimes it becomes easier for us to realize, oh, that sounds really silly. And I hear it coming from you, it sounds silly. Of course, there's also the danger that having your worst fears be like reinforced by a ton of people can then make you feel even more convinced that they must be right because look, all these other people are saying it. But yes, coming back to what you're saying, Paladin Hulk, just ask them. But as Krellin replies, that's super scary for sure. Deceptive Mirror, you say, I know some people look up their star sign compatibility with their famous crush, such as any member of BTS. Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely done that before. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure as a teenager, I was regularly just like, Keanu Reeves, when are we going to get married? And would like Google his birthday and be like, okay, are we compatible? Doesn't matter that he's like decades older than me and doesn't know I exist. Because, it's what tweens and teenagers and even adults do, right? It's fantasizing. It's allowed. Around, and it could be some pre-wedding jitters. I would definitely say that happens. Even in my relationship with Charlie, like I was very happy. I felt very sure. And like, yeah, as we got closer to getting married, there were periods of time where I was like, whoa. And it wasn't because I had any doubt about him or about us. It was just this idea of like, am I already actually at this life stage? Do I feel ready to be at this life stage? Is this where I want to be? Is there something like, do I know? It was just questions. Paladin Hulk, if you're that insecure in your relationship, there's got to be some kind of conversation. And I would say, yes, the fact that this person sees this and immediately kind of thinks something's wrong, a conversation would be really good. And a lot of these tabs I actually have open for different Reddit conversations are fundamentally coming down to this, where it's like, this situation means a conversation needs to happen. And that comes back to this idea of regret that we were talking about. And I'm currently writing an article about what to do if you're unsure if your consent has been violated. Like if you're in a situation either in the moment or you're reflecting back on it later and you're like, I don't feel confident that this situation was good, but you're not sure sort of like how to process it. And a lot of the time, it comes down to probably something happened in there that just needs to be talked about. And talking about it might make you think that either everything was fine or it was a consent incident instead of a consent violation. But a lot of the time, things just need to be talked about. And sometimes when new things happen in a relationship, it can expose or reveal, I don't want to say weaknesses, but sort of like unexplored parts you didn't even know were there. And you might not realize that you've got a sense of insecurity here. Are there other, like, I would want to ask this person, are there other things that are happening now that make you feel like there's something to worry about? Has your partner's behavior changed in some other way? I would want to make sure the person was feeling really grounded first before asking that. I wouldn't want to ask it if they were already feeling pretty activated, because it would be a lot riskier because it'd be more likely to like feel that there might be things and connections that they wouldn't normally go to. But if someone feels calmer and more grounded, they're sort of less likely to start to kind of project onto different things. Anyway, Carlin, you said, so most of the comments are, in fact, ask her, but OP has also posted they're extremely insecure, a fact that fiance knows. Okay, yeah, so you got it opened. And you're right, yeah, looking at it, especially if she isn't really into astrology, could be so many hypothetical things, for sure. And this also comes to one of the questions that it's, in general, we've talked about it before, of like good questions to deal with stress or anxiety or uncertainty when we have a thought that's really plaguing us. It can be things like, am I confusing something that is possible with something that is true? It's possible that your fiance is not interested in you anymore and they're looking at the compatibility of like the new cute person who sits near them at work. It's possible, but am I acting as though that possibility is true? Am I confusing something? Like it's similar to people being like, you can't go to this party because, the house that it's at might catch on fire. And it's like, well, that's possible, but that's kind of always possible. Is it actually something that's true, though? And then the other thing is, do I actually have any evidence for this? What is the evidence I have for this fear? And what is the evidence I have against this fear? Which is also really important to ask. Like, what is the evidence I have for and the evidence I have against whatever thing I'm feeling worried about? Deceptive mirror, I've done that too. No one's immune to checking to see if they'd have a chance with their famous crush, no matter how happy their relationship is. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that it's also just, we put so much sort of weight on the initial sort of phase of a relationship, the feeling kind of out of control, the feeling obsessive, the like novelty of it. And most of the stories we tell, movies, TV shows, books, are about that period of time, with maybe some happily ever after. Maybe you get a flash forward to like 10 years later when they're in some sort of like domestic bliss or whatever. I think a lot of books do that, including a lot of YA has done that. I think, spoiler alert, some pretty popular YA series that have love triangles, which is a common theme in YA, is that, one person is picked, and then usually after the end of the book, or like the main storyline, after the resolution, you kind of get a flash forward to like, oh, the person that they picked, here's them together, and look, they've got like 12 children, like whatever. And exactly, deceptive mirror. Okay, so I can enjoy a love triangle because it's kind of, how can I say this? I like sad boys, and nothing makes a sad boy sadder than fear that his one true love may reject him and he will go back into the shadows or whatever. I had to get over that a long time ago to uh, get into a place where I could have positive relationships. But, uh, you know, uh, it's nice in the sense of the joke I'm making about sad boys, but also the idea of like, being that desirable that you could like hold the attention without necessarily even having to give that much at the time to like two equally desirable people. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to get the feeling that like you're worth it in this way. Is it, an adaptive or sustainable thought to be having? No, but it is real. It's a real thing that a lot of, like, obviously a lot of people like. And I will also say that I sometimes struggle with the central crux of a story being the main character loves more than one person at the same time. The world is going to fall apart. And I'm just like, have people considered that there are actual ways to make that work? And like, yes, it could be like, oh, the other people don't want that. And so there is some tension, but yeah. I'm less sort of taken in by them than I was when I was a teenager. Paladin Hulk, you said happily ever after equals nothing happens to you once you're married. Um, and Aradin, especially if the two suitors are brothers or sisters, etc. Yeah, that's also kind of weird and silly. And so yeah, the this person says, okay, none of the celebrities with a birthday on that date makes sense, but you never know. But it could also be a friendship compatibility. And also, I Google the oddest shit for no reason. Yeah, like I definitely just will get a thought in my head and regularly search on the internet for an answer to it. And I'm sure if you looked at my search history, there's so many things you could assume or read into that, you know, I Google things about the medical conditions I have, and then every once in a while I was like, I need to Google 20 different medical conditions to throw Google off the scent of like not wanting to sell my medical data. If I Google every medical condition, they won't know which one I actually have. But yeah, this is okay. So this person asked, was it specific to romantic compatibility? I could see myself Googling something similar with my new boss, and it was specifically for love, sex, and marriage. Now, the thing is, it could be something you're doing on behalf of a friend. Your partner could have the same star sign as a friend of theirs, and their friend has a new boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're Googling it for them. You know, um, I think that it is the kind of thing where if you want a resolution to this, you're going to have to talk about it at some point, or you're just going to torture yourself with worry. There are plenty of ways to bring it up, which is, you can be like, you can bring it up with a joke and just be like, oh, hey, I didn't know my birthday was this date. And, or like, ooh, are you like really into Capricorns these days or something? Whatever the star sign was. Um, if that's what works, you could just say like, hey, totally accidentally, I saw you were looking up your star sign with somebody else's. Is there anything you want to talk about? Or if you don't want to talk about it directly, you can just say like, hey, we're planning to get married and I just want to check in and make sure you're really feeling good about these things and like have a sit down talk. It's tough if you've got big anxieties, right? But it's going to be one of those things like if you want something like a long-term to relationship to work long term, you're going to have to be able to have big conversations at some point. And finding tools to work through this anxiety is going to be really important. And it's one of the things that gets tricky with consent, where it's like, if I don't ever, if setting aside extremes, right? Like, really, please know that I'm setting aside the extremes of like things that are obviously never consensual or things that are kind of pretty much always consensual. If I've got a boundary around something in particular, like let's say if I'm looking at my email or my Facebook messages or whatever, like if Charlie and I are watching, a YouTube video together and I'm looking at something else in the other window, if I had a boundary around something like, I don't want Charlie to ever look at messages that I'm sending because somebody in my past used to do that and they would use it against me, and that makes me really stressed out. If I never, ever tell Charlie that I have that feeling, and I never talk about it, there's never going to be any resolution. So, yes, my consent is still being violated. Like my boundaries are being crossed. And that does not mean Charlie is doing something inherently wrong or bad or evil. What it means is at some point I need to talk with Charlie about, hey, I know I haven't told you about this yet, but I've got this boundary. Here's what the boundary is. It's been crossed a bunch and it's made me feel really uncomfortable. Can we talk through some ways in which, like, we can, I can talk about my feelings about how it's made me uncomfortable. Can we talk about ways in which, we can work through it and like do some things that might make me feel like I can trust again, even though I know you're not trying to do anything weird, it's because of this past. It's got, my body is kind of responding in this way. Can we sort of talk about what we might be able to do to bring it back to a baseline or something? So it's tough because if Charlie doesn't know that I have this boundary and I never say anything to him about it being crossed, and it's not a boundary that everybody has or that is necessarily like obvious, the boundary is likely to be continually crossed. And it's not like Charlie's fault. And also, it's the kind of thing where like we need to communicate. Yes, it's good if Charlie like checks in about these sorts of things and like, obviously like reading over someone's shoulder is kind of a rough example because a lot of people have boundaries around that. It was just what came into my mind. But let's say like, I don't like it if somebody is drinking hot things while standing next to me because I'm afraid they're going to like burn me or something. And it makes me anxious. If I never tell Charlie that, he's going to have no way of knowing that. And it doesn't make the boundary crossing Charlie's fault. It also doesn't make it my fault. It's not about fault. It's about we need to talk about boundaries and have a check-in conversation with each other. Okay, let's see what y'all are saying in chat. Deceptive Mirror, you said, one of the best fanfics I ever read before I was really familiar with polyam was the two people in the love triangle agreeing they both loved one person who loved them and both wanted to be with them without fighting, and they fell in love with each other too. Cute. That sounds very cute. Aradin, or perhaps they are in a position like you are with the Consent Academy where you have to respect the privacy of others. Yeah, that's also possible. December, they shared, then they cared. I love it. I love it. So yeah, this is just, it's difficult. It's difficult. This person, I don't want to bring it up for fear of a major argument about privacy, as I would then have been snooping. It's not exactly snooping. Accidentally seeing something is not the same thing as snooping. That nuance might get lost in the conversation. And yes, an argument can happen if people get really dysregulated. Everybody gets kind of really worked up and kind of loses the ability to feel in communication with their feelings, and then kind of things escalate. Or if people, if something is a touch point, something that's really sensitive. And in those cases, how do I want to say this? Arguments are not necessarily a bad thing, first of all, and they can be actually healing, and they can be something that, increases the sustainability of a relationship. It depends, right? There's a lot of caveats on this thing that I'm saying, but not having this kind of conversation because you're afraid of how it might go is rough. That's going to make it a lot harder. This person here asked any other signs, and I think that this is a good point. Like, could you look at the rest, like if you, this would actually be snooping, but looking at the rest of their history, you might see they've Googled like 10 other signs, and like this, they're just looking up the compatibility with every member of like BTS, and it's fine. And this person said, not really. And I'm like, how do you know? I have told her I'm an insecure person. She knows this. We have discussed our past in detail and understand that we both went through regarding trust issues. She always tries to reassure me that she loves me only and that there is no one else she wants to be with. So this to me is also like, you know, you've had these kinds of conversations before. You've stated these needs. You can do it. You can do it. And I agree with this Dom guy PS5. Unless she gives you any other reason to be suspicious, I wouldn't worry about this too much. I'm going to stop with that. Okay, let's look at another one. This one's a little too similar, and it kind of comes down to the same things. Just talk about it. This was just, am I the asshole in general? Okay, this one is just sort of silly. This was it's our no stupid questions, and I'll put it in the chat. Does King Charles III really deserve all the hate he's getting from people because of his past marriage with Lady Diana? So I think this one's kind of funny because it's just like so topical because, you know, the queen died and Charles is going to become king and be coronated, and, you know, it's, you know, yeah. And the most recent season of The Crown really goes into the disillusion of his marriage, and there's all these documentaries that have come up in the last few years. Like, this is, you know, a 30-plus-year-old issue that's really being brought back into people's minds. And to be fair, a lot of the media is sensationalized. A lot of it is very one-sided. A lot of it is influenced by like the power of the, what is it called? Like the Institute or something is like the company that is the royal family. They have a tremendous amount of power. There's a lot of complicating factors. But the main thing I've always wanted to, not wanted, but the main thing I've thought for a very long time about this is it's absolutely rough because King Charles was in love with this woman, Camilla, for a very, very long time. And like many people in his family, the sort of institute of this royal family said, for the good of the crown, you cannot be with the person you love. You have to marry someone who we deem to be more respectable, whatever. A lot of the time it came from, you know, the fact that the person was already married or was divorced, and, you know, the issues that come from public perception of that kind of thing. However, what I do want to say is, from all accounts that I have interacted with, not that I care that much about this particular issue because, like, whatever, but from all the accounts I've been able to find, he never really stopped seeing Camilla. And to me, that means that he never really gave the relationship with Diana a chance. But the other thing is, if he knew that's kind of what he was going to do, or knew he was really, like, he should have told the future spouse, hey, I need you to know this is a consent issue. Like, this is where it's relevant, right? I'm not just talking about this because I want to talk about King Charles. It's a consent issue. If I were secretly, or not necessarily secretly, if I were still completely in love and obsessed with one of my exes and I still wanted to see them regularly, it would be unethical of me to not tell a future spouse about that. And because consenting to being in a relationship with me, consenting to getting married to me, consenting to do things like take on all of the stress that it is to become part of like this sort of establishment, you know, and like rich people problems, yes, but like still it's stressful. that would be very non-consensual to not actually share that information, right? It's intentionally leaving out essential information, especially if you know, hey, if I tell this person this thing about me, they're less likely to agree to marry me. Well, that means all the more why you should tell them. So that's my first thought about this, is that if he didn't tell Diana before they got married, hey, I am desperately in love with my ex, who's not really my ex, I have continued to see her even though she's married. Um, you know, eh, that's not very consensual. The second point is a little bit of self awareness, a little bit of, willing to be forthcoming. Charles probably could have talked to any number of like lesser nobles because, Diana was Lady Spencer. Uh, he could have found somebody who was like perfectly respectable for the demands of this institution, who was like down to just be the like public facing spouse to get the glory and the jewels and the money and the like be the face of the monarchy, and while you fuck off with your mistress. Like there are plenty of people who are completely okay with that arrangement, and even more who would probably be okay with like, are you okay with me also going and having my own side piece? You could have had that situation rather than getting someone who was like a teenager when you met them and like started dating, and then like 20 when they got married, and then yeah, there's a lot of things that I feel were pretty non-consensual about the whole situation. Deceptive mirror, it could be argued that the monarchy is, or in general, that enabled a lot of murder, pillaging land. So yeah, I mean, for sure, for sure, there's no doubt. And Diana was also coerced into the marriage as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I don't know enough of the details about it, but I think so. Krellin royal inheritance mucks up the ability to have an open marriage. It does muck it up, but also, like, if people are already doing it, they're already doing it. You can tell people, like, don't get pregnant. Don't get the other person pregnant. Like, that's a bare minimum, but people are going to do it. It's, people are horny. Not everybody, but like in general, a lot of people are really horny. Um, yeah, we Consent Academy will attest to. Sometimes we have to kick people out of classes because they're too interested in sharing. This was a long time ago. It's been better for a very long time, or people email us. That's the bigger thing. Sometimes people will email us with like their horny thoughts, and it's like, okay, why are you emailing a consent-based organization with your horny thoughts? Weird. Um, so people here have a lot of varied opinions on this. A lot of people are very like negative. He could have been an honorable and good person by not cheating on his wife and humiliating her. I'm not a big fan of the whole like good bad binary. I'm also not a fan of like, yeah, I don't really like this. I would agree it's an oversimplification. Um, yeah, yeah. I think it's tough, but it was not very consensual. That's the main point. The whole situation was not very consensual, and I'm not a fan of like, I'm a fan of consequences, not necessarily of like what people worry about when they talk about cancel culture, but this is not a family that's going to experience many consequences. So like the public being like, oh, this is saucy. Sure. That's about as much as they're going to have. Okay, let's find another one to talk about. Oh yeah, this is one I thought was really an interesting question. And I think this will be maybe the last one for today. We've been at it for like just about an hour. And I know normally I do 2 or more hours, but I stayed up until like 3 in the morning last night writing an article for Consent Academy because I just got really like hyper focused on it. and I kind of want to do some more relaxing this evening because it was like I taught a class and then we had this big debrief and then I was doing this other work and then like I just didn't step away from work soon enough to like calm down to go to bed and I got hyperfixated. Kind of want to not do that today. So this will probably be the last one. So this is different. This is from the Girl Survival Guide. And this question I think is really interesting. It's about regret. How do you get over self-hate when you sacrificed your goals for a partner? And so the post, I think this title is really interesting, but I want to read the rest of what the person says because there's a lot of like, just sort of like, therapeutic-esque like intervention points that we can look at here for like sneaky ways of even just like the grammar of how we talk about certain things related to ourselves or related to guilt, related to responsibility can really heighten very negative experiences. And so there's a lot of good intervention points, not necessarily for this person in particular, because I'm not here giving this person advice, but just sort of talking in general. Okay. It says remove if not allowed, but I'm looking for relationship advice. I'm not looking for relationship. I'm looking for self-forgiveness advice. LOL. I've always prided myself on having my head on straight, prioritize school, work, etc. And then this semester I dropped the ball. I've never been, okay, so this is one of those things where like, I've always prided myself for having my head on straight, prioritize schoolwork, etc. I can relate to that because I had a lot of this when I was young. And there is particular risk when one really prides themselves on usually pretty narrow symbols of like acceptability, productivity, achievement, and like priding yourself on prioritizing school and work tends to, I think, carry a lot of that risk. And I also think it's like kind of a real shit show of a thing to prize. Not that this person's doing anything wrong, it's like what society teaches us. But like life, you can prioritize like living your life and it's okay. And okay, so continuing. Then this semester I dropped the ball. So then to me, this says like, my next worry is you're riding a wave probably of like a type of non-sustainable idea of like self-control and like really being like probably perfect, though obviously this person isn't saying all of this, but then dropping the ball kind of has this idea of like things were great and then suddenly things are not great. And this contrast here, I think, can make it seem like I failed something and I dropped something and I've like made this mess. And I feel like that is likely to make this feel shittier. Exactly, Rod. And I made a single mistake and now my life is ruined, kind of thinking. And it continues, I've never been so upset with myself. The worst part for me is I can try to blame mental health, the condition of the world, whatever, but I know the truth is I got distracted by a boy. So this is, if I were actually like a therapist, I would have a way easier time breaking down the issue here, but I'm going to do my best with the therapeutic training that I have. This idea of this person recognizes confounding factors and things not going as they planned. They're not necessarily recognizing that like they are human, that they are not a perfect machine, that distractions happen, that life happens, that priorities change, that it's okay to make mistakes. They're not really adding that, but they're recognizing some confounding factors like mental health. This one to me is a big signal point of like, this person's, what's going on with the mental health? Are they struggling? Is it hard for them to maintain something that sounds like it's kind of unsustainable? Okay, the condition of the world. We're in a pretty ridiculous situation with, the pandemic, things shifting around. And, I assume that this person is either a high school student or a college student and may have started high school or university, during the start of the pandemic, or gone from like being only offline to being in person. There's like all this stuff. Uh, let me see what you all are saying. Deceptive Mary said this person needs to be gentler with themselves. Distractions can sometimes happen. And Aradin says, yep, a lot of all or nothing thinking as well. Quote, I made a single mistake and now my life is ruined. This person is definitely going to have issues with future relationships due to this, I think. And Deceptive Mary, you said, this is a good time to bring up the try guys and the one who, quote, lost focus in the relationship. Yeah, I don't know enough about the situation with the try guys. I was like really disappointed when I heard about it because that guy was like, I like the Try Guys videos. I hadn't really watched them in a long time, but being a wife guy, man. Being a wife guy. Okay, so I got distracted by a boy. Also, like, this it's pretty normal. I feel so stupid and I'm so upset all the time. So this is something that worries me because I can't change the past, but I have so many regrets. Oh, hello, Jan Punkt. Thank you for the follow. I really appreciate that. Um, I can't change the past because I have so many regrets that really add up to being an agreeable pushover. Um, and I really feel as if I wouldn't have failed my classes if I'd had a spine and didn't get swept up in the serotonin fantasy. As a feminist and someone who wants to make their mother proud, I'm filled with self-hatred and anger. So, like, this is not a very feminist way to do this. Hello, I'm also in Europe. I'm in Vienna. Where are you located? Are you also in Vienna? That'd be cool. Western Germany. Nice. Filled with self-hatred and anger. Any advice is appreciated. I know I won't make this mistake again. I just like to cry about it less. So how does consent come into this? And why do I want to talk about this with the idea of regret, which is kind of the theme of today? There's a lot here. We could really talk about this from a therapeutic lens, but I want to talk about it just specifically from the consent lens, which is that sometimes we feel regret when, kind of what I was talking about at the beginning of today's stream, when we don't necessarily have the sense that we had the opportunity to set boundaries or that we were able to maintain our boundaries. And that doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean your life is over. Also, like, definitely, if you're struggling with like not being perfect in school, I really want to tell you, like, I graduated from university with a like 2.99 GPA. Like 3.0 is like considered to be like the bare minimum good. And like if you want to go to like a lot of other things, they all want that. And you know what? I've been really friggin' successful in my life and done tons of things. And like it doesn't matter that much. For the most part, the grades you get, like graduating is what matters. The grades you get only really matter for like getting accepted to some very specific kinds of things. And even then, it's not the only option, right? Like I went on the JET program, right? This big, famous, like government job with this shit GPA. And like I've done a ton, like it's okay. It's okay. Like I really want to stress that like if you're like this kind of person, which is like really driven high achiever, give yourself a little grace because you're gonna figure it out. And if you're not a really driven high achiever, also give yourself some grace because you're gonna figure it out. And I agree that there's a lot of standards that are not that realistic. And Krellin, I was raised in a household where me getting anything other than an A was unacceptable. Oh yeah, for sure. Same. Like this, one of the reasons I picked this is because this is so relatable. Like I would often feel this after when I was a teenager, especially if I was dating and the relationship didn't work out. I'd be like, why did I wait all this time when I could have just been like min-maxing my life? Like I could have just been maximalizing my productivity and studying. And it's like, but I'm not a robot. I'm a human being who's a horny teenager and like who's trying to get practice at romantic relationships and like wants to develop my social skills, right? Like that's the other thing is like even if a relationship doesn't work out, you're likely going to be getting practice at other essential skills. So this person here is probably still benefited from getting practice with an intense romantic relationship. And now they can spend some time reflecting on, were there places where I didn't set a boundary that I feel like I should have? Now, you have to be really careful with the should, but maybe it's better to even say, like, is there a place where I didn't set a boundary where next time, if you catch yourself having those should phrases, you can change it to where next time I will want to set a boundary. And if I find those points, what can that boundary be like? How would I want to set a boundary here? What would I really want to set a boundary around? And transform because a lot of this kind of self-hatred stuff, this is going to be a lot of shoulds. This is going to be like, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done this. But the thing is that you can't change the past. And two, like, you're allowed to be a human being and make mistakes and have, impulsivity or things that you want in the moment that, like, later the impact of the things that you wanted is not what you want. So then you don't want it again. So where consent comes in here, a lot of this has to do with internal consent, right? This person on some level seems to feel like they violated their own boundaries, that they didn't respect their own value system, and that now they're experiencing the impact of their actions. Now, maybe there were aspects of the relationship that were not good, where, like, they're saying, added up to being an agreeable pushover, which makes me wonder if the person that they were involved with really was very demanding and maybe gave them a lot of ultimatums of, like, if you don't come do this thing with me right now, I'm going to break up with you. Maybe. I don't have evidence for that, really. It's just this one being an agreeable pushover that makes me worry. But setting that aside, the rest of this is that they got practice in a new type of scenario, right? It sounds like, I've always prided myself on having my head on straight, prioritize school and work. Sounds to me like they probably haven't had a lot of this kind of relationship practice. So they've gotten to experience a new situation and now can better understand what is within and not within their boundaries. What do they want romantic relationships to look like, and how do they want them to fit into their life? And maybe they can say, okay, next time I'm going to hold my ground on these sorts of things, or I'm going to set boundaries here that I didn't realize I wanted to set, or I'm going to sort of navigate this thing again differently. And it's okay, right? Like, this is one of the things with consent that people often get really worried about, is they think that consent has to mean nothing goes wrong ever, and that it also has to be perfectly pre-planned and perfectly logical. I even see some consent models where it's like, before having sex with someone or getting involved with someone, make sure you talk about all of your triggers and all of the things you like and you don't like. But you can't always know that. You can't always know. And you might have something that you normally really like, and then with this person, it's weird. Like someone who says yep all the time during sex. Like, that's weird. If you're a yepper, I'm sorry, it's weird. um, and anyway, this is about sort of, we're making mistakes, and consent is also a process of discovery, right? We have to try things and explore things to have an understanding of, like, where my boundaries are, what boundaries are hard versus what boundaries are, permeable, what versus flexible or soft or open, right? Like, I can have things, I'm very open. If you watch these streams, I share a lot about myself. I'm very comfortable with personal questions. I just don't feel shame most of the time. And I like to share. But, every once in a while I'll worry, like, oh no, did I go outside of my own boundaries by oversharing? Did I, and a lot of that comes down to, like, people have used things against me in the past that I've shared, or worries about, is there some social norm that I'm just unaware of that I am transgressing and I now look like really foolish or something? And for the most part, I don't actually care about that. Like, I am who I am and I'm going to do what I do. Um, what is worse, yeppers? Yeppers for sure. Yeah, if someone instead of saying like, "Oh, this is wild, I love this," said "poggers," I would always be like, "Oh, I gotta stop." Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so many things, not just sexual things, but in life, where like I don't know if I want to do them or not until I try. Right? There are things that like happen in the heat of the moment where like after the fact, I'm like, you know what? I don't love this thing. I think a great example, and this is going to be a mildly sexual example. One time when I was a teenager, I was making out with somebody and they were like kissing me on my neck and everything. And I was wearing like a tank top and they suddenly just like lifted my arm up and like licked my armpit. And that was very surprising and strange. And now, for some people, that would be a big consent violation. Like, some people are like, I really don't want my armpits touched. This is absolutely outside of my boundaries. I would be super upset. For me, I was just kind of like, oh, that's weird. And in the moment, I was just kind of like, okay, interesting. And then afterwards, I talked to the person and I was like, yeah, I'm not super into that. Like, maybe don't do that again. And they were like, yeah, no, that was weird. And this is also one of those things with like a lot of consent incidents. The solution is to talk about them. I know this is a little bit different than what we're talking about with this person's situation, but with a lot of consent incidents, just talking through it is often how you prevent them from becoming violations or becoming really stressful. So when I talked to that person, I was like, points for creativity. I don't want my armpit licked. They were just like, yeah, I don't know why I did that. I was just like caught up in the moment and like did that. And I'm not going to do that again because it was weird. Also, deodorant doesn't taste good. And I was like, good. Okay. We're on the same page. But you know what? That was something where like neither of us would have probably ever thought to negotiate around that. I would not have thought to set a boundary around that. And they probably would have not thought ahead of time to ask permission around that. And it doesn't mean that the consent practice there was good, because there was still something that happened that was changing the nature of the situation and it wasn't checked in beforehand. And it's not within sort of like generally culturally accepted established ways of doing things. Even then, things can still be non-consensual, but it's the default cultural consent frameworks are their own thing. But just talking about it. Okay, let's see what y'all are saying in chat. Our audience said also realizing that beating yourself up about things in the past doesn't help you in the present isn't as obvious and clear when you're in the middle of it. Absolutely. Dr. Melody River, you said an element about consent is being able to choose. Absolutely. So being able to choose is important. And when it comes to regret after choices are made, and I'm going to rephrase some of the things I said at the start of today's stream, sometimes the regret can come because you didn't have enough information before you gave the choice. And you didn't have, enough information. You didn't really understand all the information that you had, or you didn't have enough time to process everything. Sometimes things happen so fast that you're not able to make a choice, or, you didn't have time to actually process what you were being asked before you said yes or no. It can also be things like, was my capacity really reduced, right? Like, was I really tired? Was I really hungry? Was I intoxicated, or in pain? Or was my capacity reduced because I was something like sexually aroused? That reduces capacity. Any kind of intensity also reduces capacity. And intensity can be things like, time pressure, the nature of what you're doing, getting caught up in things. And it can also be, so a lot of regret can be, there was a thing that I wanted, but had I known the impact this thing could have, I would have wanted something different. And so that's kind of what I think this situation is that they wanted this relationship. They seemed to really enjoy the, like, I kind of, got so focused on this partner. However, they did not know ahead of time that there was going to be this kind of impact. And probably had they known the impact that would have happened, they would have made different choices. And that means that other discussions needed to happen. So in this situation, as far as some other aspects of consent, slowing down, checking in, inviting people to set boundaries can be really helpful. So for this person thinking about the boy that they got distracted by, it would have been good consent practice to slow down things, maybe not demand so much of the person's time right away, or find ways to spend time together that are not likely to create a negative impact, to give this person time to process how they feel about everything. That can be tough, especially at the beginning stages of a romantic relationship when we're sort of all caught up in the, serotonin fantasy, as this person puts it, but the novelty of things and the sort of chemical processes that happen when we're first falling in love with someone. But then also, double checking about boundaries. We've talked about several things in today's stream where, like, boundaries are things that often change over time. Something that I was very comfortable with when I was young, I'm not comfortable with now. Something that I maybe thought was like I would never be comfortable with a few years ago is now something I might do all the time. And this is very normal. And let's see here. What else did you say? Jan Punkt, you said it sounds a bit like one of those cases where something had or been seen something in, have seen something. Sorry, I'm misreading the sentence. It sounds a bit like one of those cases where someone had seen something in porn and just tried it out. I hope this doesn't sound judgy. No, and as Aradin points out, we've talked about porn and this effect on, and its effect on consent, where like porn will really make certain things that are very, very dangerous or very, very risky seem very default and normal to a lot of people without them recognizing like these are actors and actresses. They are also professionals and they're being paid to do these things. So they might be agreeing to things that they wouldn't normally do for their own pleasure, but they're willing to do for work. And then also that there's usually negotiation of what happens beforehand, and there's care that happens after the camera stops rolling, and all that gets left out. So yeah, for sure. And then Dr. Melody River, you said yes. How much information and time are certainly relevant. I like the capacity aspect that you raise. I like your discussion of capacity and being able to communicate, for example, verbal versus other. Yeah. And deceptive mirror. The problem with lacking healthy sexual education is that people look to porn for, and yeah, porn is not often right. Yeah, this is a huge thing. And if you're interested, Jan, I have either on our YouTube or on the Twitch here in our past videos, I have a whole series, and I think it's in the playlist called Just Chatting About Consent, where my co-director, Ash, and I just talk in depth about sort of pornography, and I think we have like 3 or 4 videos on it, and sort of like pornography's impact on, consent and society. And we're not being anti-porn. We're just sort of talking very generally about it. But yeah, so with this situation here, there's a lot kind of going on here. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of angles we can approach this from. And I think the biggest thing I would say is that like this person has learned that, I don't want to say it, this kind of regret usually means that there was something that was not super consensual about the situation. Where the consent problem lies is not always clear, and it might be multi-pronged. There might be like different aspects, but it probably means that it would be good for this person to spend a little time to ground themselves, kind of recenter and calm and think through like, what are the things I have enjoyed about this relationship? And what are the things where I'm feeling tension? It comes back to the origin of the word consent, or the etymology. So the origin of the word consent literally means with feeling, or to feel together, because con means with, and sent means like sentire, which is like sentiment or sensation, feeling. So with feeling, or to feel together. And it has to be something that feels correct, and often in your body and also in your mind. And sometimes there is a mismatch and incongruence between how we're thinking about a situation, how we're feeling it, and how our body is responding to it. And that should always be a moment to sort of check in and say, hey, what's the source of this mismatch? Is there something that needs to be slowed down? Is there something that needs to be checked in on, something renegotiated? So this person hopefully can spend some time figuring out like, where in this situation did consent go awry? Where did consent not work out? Are there places where I set boundaries and they weren't respected? Are there places where I didn't set boundaries that I want to the next time? Were there parts of my own internal consent that I wasn't listening to? And if so, how can I create structure so that doesn't happen again in the future? And so that's one of those things where, the example I give of, if I worry about something like oversharing at a party or something, and I can feel like, oh, I violated my own internal consent by sharing things because I got caught up in the moment. What I can do in that situation is think about, what structures can I set up for myself to reduce the risk of this happening again? The other part here, kind of going back to this for this person, like if they wanted advice, I would really say to them, it's okay. You're a human being. You're allowed to make mistakes. One bad semester is not going to, destroy your entire future, and one of the things that happens a lot is people kind of have this, let's just say like applying to a university or grad school. If you're applying to one of these like really good schools. I had a teenager I was tutoring years ago, and she really wanted to go to she was actually German, and she wanted to go to, the best university in Germany for medicine. And she really was making herself sick with fear of not getting into this university. And like, she was just obsessed with her grades and needing to be perfect. And, oh, hello, no SLX, NOS1X. I can't tell if that's a 1 or an L. Welcome. Anyway, yeah, so she was really worried about getting into this university, and she would think that anytime she didn't get a perfect score on an exam, that she was going to, yes, that's my kitty. I hope you could hear that cute sound she made when I pet her. But what I said to her is like, hey, this university has a 2% acceptance rate. One quiz is not going to be the difference between whether or not you get accepted. It's basically going to be winning the lottery. Do you win the lottery and get in or not? So some of the other things I would say to this person is like, universities, graduate schools, a lot of these things, they look at a person very holistically, not just like a single number. It depends on the country you are in. Some countries, it can be a lot more focused on a single number or like a single exam score. But a lot of other places, it's much more holistically. And there's other opportunities. It's a lot of the time you can take the exam again another time, or like you get some, work experience and you reapply, and the work experience ends up being more important than the grades you got years ago. So anyway, Jan Punktu said, I mean, porn is, correct me if I'm wrong, a presentation of fantasies, and I think this is something that should be more often taught to people. And I'll have a look at your videos. I'm glad you'll have a look at them. I hope you enjoy them. And yes, you know, pornography is one of those things where it's like, I hope that it's being made consensually, or like all the people participating in the making of pornography are actually consenting to what's happening. It's tricky, you know, in like capitalism where like people selling their labor is not agreeing to sell their labor is not necessarily the same thing as like really consenting to it. But I hope that the people feel that they can actually set boundaries, that like, you know, they're being cared for, that things are kind of being made well. And setting that aside, I think that it's perfectly fine to have these expressions of different fantasies. There are certain limits, and different countries have different laws about different types of things, like certain types of scenarios are not allowed to be shown in certain types of pornography in some countries. And in other countries they are, and there's all kinds of different rules. And it's not even just like extreme pornography that you might be thinking about. Like there's a lot of rules different countries have. Places like Japan, for example, it all has to be censored. You can't actually show genitals. So that's kind of setting those things aside. But yeah, it's fantasy, and we've been making pornographic things forever, like since for a very long time. And it seems pretty human, and it's also okay. And uh, yes, I agree that the general censoring um, uh, is pretty funny. I think, Krillin, it does. I think that the people who are acting in pornography are supposed to have their pubic hair, that they can like trim it, but they're not allowed to remove it. Um, but you know, every country has different rules. Um, and these things do shape reality and do shape what people accept as being normal. Um, so yeah, it really depends. Going back to this scenario here, um, yeah, I really feel for this person. To me, when you feel a lot of regret after the fact, after a situation, it really is a signal that probably somewhere in there was consent was not well practiced. And who and why and where are questions that it can take time to answer. It may take years to process it. You may process it, you know, right now this person's in this very acute state of sort of grief about maybe both the end of the relationship and the impact the relationship had on their studies. And they're going to need to process that. And they might feel kind of angry and bitter towards this ex boyfriend for a while. Or they may come around and realize, oh, you know, I wish I had let myself just enjoy that relationship and not worry about this so much because I have this other perspective. What we feel about these things can shift. But this kind of thing here often indicates that something was happening outside of this person's boundaries. Either they didn't set boundaries, they didn't listen to their own internal consent, or they set boundaries and they weren't respected, or some combination of all of the above, or they just didn't have enough information to even know what they were getting themselves into until after the fact. And so this is a good place when we feel regret. It's often a good place to reflect on both the intrapersonal consent and interpersonal consent. So inner consent and consent between you and other people. Yeah. And then Araden, you said, I mean, just look at ancient Egypt and you see a lot of genitals in the carving. I mean, there's also like in England somewhere, there's like that giant hillside drawing of like a giant with a huge erection and stuff. I mean, yeah. Anyway. Um, Exactly. Yeah, it's you just can't have shaved performers. Yeah. But anyway, I'm gonna start to wrap up here. I want to let you all know that we have a class coming up. There, all of our classes are online this coming Saturday. It's the last class in this round of our Consent for Leadership, and it's on personal accountability. You don't have to be in a formal position of leadership. We're going to talk a lot about how sometimes you may be held accountable for other people's behavior, or you might have a position of power and you make a big mistake, or questions about when should you make a private versus a public apology, and also how do you protect people's confidentiality and anonymize things versus balancing transparency. We have other classes coming up very soon. Sorry. Here we have this week, we have on Tuesday, our European Consent Basics class. Consent Basics is always free. And so you can come to that. You don't have to pay for it. You can make a donation if you want. And it is in the evening on Tuesday, European time. And then we have on the 15th our sort of like American-based Consent Basics class. It'll be in the evening on the East Coast time and West Coast. Yeah, it'll be evening America time. And so those are the two classes that are coming up really soon. And then we have our 2023 calendar is starting to be added. Starting next year, our discussion groups will be moving to monthly. So we'll have our men's consent discussion group, women's consent discussion group. We also have a trans and non-binary consent discussion group that'll start in February, plus a BIPOC discussion group. And we have classes like our Consent Basics, of course, we run it twice a month, every month. We have our Consent and Leadership series, will be starting up again in January. And we also have our accountability series that'll go over accountability processes, basics, how to make accountability pods, and also complex accountability processes and some limitations of accountability processes. So keep an eye out for our schedule and classes. If any of the ticket prices create a sort of financial barrier for you, you can send us an email and we can work something out. If you are new here, consider following us if you're not already. You can also follow us on social media. And we have a Patreon where you can get exclusive content as well as access to our Discord, discounts on classes, and like I said, exclusive content, articles, podcast. We'll have some other things adding. Just posted an article today actually about what to do when you read a public call out online and what are some ways to support the people involved and what are some things not to do. And that's a Patreon exclusive. What else? What else did I want to share with you all? And our Discord. You get that just $3 a month. They'll give you access to our Discord. Oh yeah, and lastly, we wrote a book. If you're looking for a Christmas present, I do just want to really recommend our book. You can get it on Amazon or Powell's Books. It is The Consent Primer, Foundations for Everyday Life, and it's great for teens and adults, and I really recommend it. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been really lovely to hang out with you. Welcome to the new people. Thank you for joining us in chat. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and I'll see some of you on Tuesday. Bye.